What's happening? This is your girl Megan. Welcome back to the Hood Astro Queen. To all of my returning subscribers. But if this is your first time on my page today, don't leave without hitting that subscribe button first, okay? Because you know you want to. And while you at it, hit that notification bell so that way you'll be alerted whenever I make a new post. So tonight, I wanted to do a birth chart reading on Ted Bundy. And I got a request a while back to do his chart, but I hadn't yet seen the docu-series on Netflix. So there's basically a documentary on him to where they're pretty much detailing his life, his crimes, and his prison sentence as well as his execution. He was a serial killer and one of the first serial killers or to the point where the phrase serial killer wasn't a thing when he was out there serial killing bitches, you know what I'm saying? So, because this was back in the 70s, early 70s, late 60s. And it was just a huge deal because, of course, he was killing white women, but that's neither here nor there. So, anywho, he gets convicted of, killing all of these women because, I mean, he killed at least 10 women. And the way that he would just, dispose of their bodies, he would have sex with them and then just proceed to torture them, even committing acts of necrophilia, fucking dead bodies. I mean, just a whole bunch of just heinous, like disgusting things. And then he would discard their bodies. So people were looking up and all of these women were coming up missing. And once they were able to trace it back to Ted, like I said, they finally coined the term serial killer as far as somebody who literally goes out and commits the act of murder like repetitively against like many people. So that was pretty interesting. And then a lot of people were saying how it was so hard to really wrap their minds around the fact that he could do these crimes because he was such a charismatic individual and he was kind of plugged in to the community. Like I believe he was associated with politics or whether he was a politician, but he ran in those circles. So he wasn't just anybody. He was definitely highly affluent. He was supposed to be a lawyer, actually. He was in law school as he was committing these crimes. So he wasn't your run-of-the-mill, like, caveman who wandered through dark alleys grabbing bitches off the corners. He was this handsome, charismatic, charming, intelligent guy with lots of status, lots of power, and just really seemingly a bright future ahead of him. But that shit took a hard left when people found out he was out here fucking bitches and then like killing them and throwing them in the woods. So there's that. Now, I mean, without further ado, let's just go ahead and get started. Okay, So, Ted Bundy was born on November 24th, 1946 at 10:35 p.m. in Burlington. Is it Burlington? Burlington, Vermont. And surprise, surprise, he is a Sagittarius. He's a strong Sagittarius, actually, because he's a Sagittarius sun and moon. And back, like taking it back to the video that I did on the killer twins who flipped out and murdered their own mother, they were Sagittarians too. But I brought up a point in the video to where I touched on the correlation between serial killers and mutable signs. Because there is this kind of parallel between the two that a lot of people in just the astrology community, so to speak, have noticed. And I remember pulling up a list of, it was 60 serial killers. And every single one of the like serial killers on that list were literally a mutable sign. So you have your Pisces, Virgo, Gemini, and Sagittarius. Mutable signs are so vulnerable to that kind of shadowy element of human nature because they tend to get lost in whatever moment they're in. Because unlike, I don't know, a cardinal sign, like such as Aries or Libra, which initiates, right, and directs new energy and channels new energy outward, or maybe a fixed sign such as Scorpio or Taurus, which is very steady, very enduring, and kind of marches along at its own pace. Mutable energy has the tendency to be shaped and molded by whatever it's around at the moment. And if it's a good environment, then it could be a good thing. But if it's not, it's a hot fucking mess. It can get bad. It can get really bad, which gives mutable signs this capacity for just drastic shifts from high to low, from up to down, from good to evil. And of course, this is not to say that every person with a mutable sign or with lots of mutable energy in their charts are serial killers who are just waiting for the opportunity to strike their victims. I'm just saying that these people tend to be kind of swept off of their feet, so to speak, by an undercurrent of emotions. And when they're feeling something in that moment, it overrides their logical thoughts. Mutable signs tend to be very free flowing. I mean, hence the whole idea of them being mutable, shape shifting. They can be here, there, everywhere. And it makes them, on the more positive note, charming, kind of easygoing, very adaptable, right? They can adapt to certain things. And it also makes them very intelligent. Mutable signs, that's something that all four mutable signs share in common. These are highly intelligent signs, with Virgo and Gemini being the more analytically, logically intelligent, and then your Pisces and Sagittarius being more intuitively, spiritually, psychically even intelligent. So it's, these people are just buzzing with just, I would even call it like spiritual stimuli, so to speak. And as a result, I personally, I don't know how spiritually inclined y'all are. Maybe you are because you're on this channel of like occult science and shit. But, there's duality in everything. And, for kind of like the tree of knowledge with Adam and Eve in the Bible. And I'm no Christian, but, I think that's a great metaphor because, to know a lot is to be, yes, enlightened, but to be susceptible to certain, I don't even know how to explain it, y'all, like certain negative forces. I think mutable signs attract a lot of negative or darker entities, so to speak. And specifically with Sagittarians, because Sagittarius is such an optimistic sign, Sagittarians tend to do a better job at kind of, keeping themselves away from that lower vibrational energy. But Sagittarians become very dangerous. And speaking for myself as a Sagittarius Sun and Mercury, we tend to become very dangerous when we get away from that optimism that we are so known for, and looking on the brighter side of things. When we disconnect from that element of spirituality, it can turn nasty, which is why, like I said, you see a lot of serial killers with that mutable sign element, but Sagittarians it's a lot of Sagittarius serial killers as well. So, there's that. Now his Saturn and Pluto are conjoined to his Leo ascendant, and this points towards his, number one, him being very secretive, right? So it explains him having that type of personality that a lot of people like didn't really know who the fuck he was when it really came down to it, because Pluto is all about, even like Scorpio ascendants have that element of not really showing their hands, and it comes down to power plays. These people can be very I don't want to say manipulative, but like just analytical when it comes to surveying a room. And they do a really good job at making you feel like you know them, but you don't. These are people who can tell you, you'll probably be telling them your business, but you will never really know any of their true tea. and Saturn there as well. Also, with his fourth house cusp being in the sign of Scorpio, and he's a Scorpio stellium, mind you. So that adds another layer of just like darkness and intensity. And it definitely explains his fascination. Because a lot of his family, I was looking online at just certain articles and doing some research, and people were saying that his family they noticed his obsession, like him being drawn towards darker things at a very young age, like him playing with knives when he was like a little kid, and just really being kind of obsessed with just the darker side of humanity from very early on. And that Scorpio stellium in his fourth house, because your fourth house represents your just the way you grew up, right? It represents your mother, home life, but it also represents your natural state of being, the way you feel most comfortable. And these people tend to be very just like I said, obsessed, like very obsessive, very intrigued with taboo things, the darker sides of life, forbidden things. I mean, necrophilia. I mean, how much more forbidden can you get, right? And I don't know if he was a pedophile. Y'all can, fact check me in the comment section below. But that too. So these people can be very intrigued. And let me see what planets he has in Scorpio, because it's a lot. His Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, and his asteroid Juno are all in, and his Chiron. Oh my God, and his Chiron. And usually people who have Chiron and Scorpio deal with some type of sexual abuse, or they're exposed to the concept of like pain and pleasure, or like they associate sex with pain, if that makes sense. And I remember in the docuseries, Ted stated that there was this kind of urge he felt to really associate, because he started off looking at like Playboy magazines, like, the little porn, dirty magazines. And then over time, it developed into this, like, I think he even described it as like a compulsion to, he started looking at, like, I don't know, videos or, images that had women who were beat up and shit, So he started to want to correlate sexy women having sex with women to pain and blood and violence. And then he just kind of, over time, it morphed into this fetish of like hurting and inflicting pain on women, and him getting some type of sexual validation, arousal from that. And all of that is Chiron and Scorpio. People who have their Chiron and Scorpio can be very, like I said, I think he was sexually abused. He didn't mention it in the tapes, but as I was doing some research, I saw that he lived with his mother had him when she was like very young and unwed. And during those times, like in the 40s and the 30s, it was just like the worst thing in the world. You were a slut, a Jezebel temptress. You were the scum of the earth if you were to have a baby out of wedlock. And so basically what she did was she moved back home to her parents, and her parents took on Ted and raised Ted as their son. So he grew up for a good portion of his life believing that his mother was his sister. And I mean, with Scorpio in the fourth house cusp, it creates secrets, right? So this could be secrets as it pertains to your family, right? Some type of something that's really not talked about. But then they were also talking about how abusive and just over the top his grandfather was. Now, looking at, like I said, this stellium, and especially this Chiron in his fourth house, I would not be surprised if his grandfather sexually abused him, or if he experienced some type of sexual violation as a child early on in life. As a matter of fact, I'm willing to put money on it. And this is reinforced with his Pluto in the first house. His fourth house lord is the sign of Scorpio, but Scorpio is co-ruled by Pluto. So when you have your fourth house lord in the first house, this can create a person whose upbringing and their home life, their family even, had very strong influence, a very strong influence on their personality, their views, and I mean, because your ascendant represents your body, even your physical body. So once again, like I said, there's just this theme present, and a lot of people who have Pluto on their ascendant or Scorpio risings, these people are very known for in astrology experiencing abuse and contacting, like I said, that element of just the darker sides of life. Scorpio is the natural ruler of the 8th house, and it represents death. It represents sex. So even with the Scorpio stellium, this explains a lot of his issue. I mean, yes, he was a murderer, but aside from him being like a murderer and a pedophile and whatever else, he was, he ultimately had an issue with sex. This man was a sex addict. And his 4th house, a lot of that activity in his 4th house definitely explains that. And he has some other indicators in his chart that support that as well. But we'll get to that. Saturn in aspect to Pluto can also bring about a sense of control. These people can be the ultimate control freaks. These people can be very big on authority, very big on even like taking advantage of people who are like weaker, you know what I'm saying? People who can't really defend themselves. But then also this aspect can point towards people who tend to be very cold, unsympathetic, people who lack empathy. So really like on some like sociopath type shit. And this is reinforced with his Pluto squaring his Venus, which remember is in his 4th house also. So, and that is kind of like the telltale sign of somebody who tends to be more on like the abusive side. And these people could have very well have received abuse as well. So he has like major themes and elements of like abuse, being both the receiver and the person who's doing the abuse. But just on a basic psychology level, this tends to be the case with like a lot of people, because they say hurt people, right? And yeah, homeboy definitely had some major issues. And with his Jupiter squaring his Saturn, this aspect points towards somebody who literally like, especially with his Saturn being in the 1st house, and his Jupiter being in his 4th house, like a Scorpio. This could deal with somebody who literally goes back and forth between like being very reserved, very conservative, somebody who's kind of like scared of they're aware of their demons, but they're kind of scared of really leaning into them and tapping into their shadow side. But then going through these periods to where they're like, because think about Jupiter as a planet, it enlarges everything that it touches. It makes everything, at its worst, Jupiter can embody like overindulgence, right? Excessiveness, going over the top. So when they do kind of get into that groove, when they do get into that, like, I'm going to dive into my pleasures, I'm going to dive into my shadow side, these people like go OD, like off the deep end. So, he could be a type of guy who likes, like, okay, I'm more of your straight-laced conservative type dude, which he kind of appeared to be on the surface, but, I'm into some kinky shit. And he knew that about himself, and it was almost like he tried to control that, because that's what that Saturn represents. It represents restriction and fear even. So this aspect could create somebody who is even like afraid of themselves, like afraid of their own capabilities. And as a result, they kind of disassociate the negative things that they do, you know what I'm saying, when they're in their Jupiter bag. You feel me? Like to the point where it's like I said, it reinforces this theme of him being a sociopath, because it's like, the straight-laced conservative guy who is very disciplined, right? He may even punish himself, like very self-punishing. He doesn't associate and identify with the person who is like this wild sexual animal. And craves blood and, everything that's like forbidden fruit and taboo, And so this could create like a teeter-totter effect to where people with this aspect can swing back and forth, between being prudes and then just being like, damn, nigga, you was like, wow, like you took it above the moon and the stars. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like you're fucking dead people, you're fucking kids, you're killing bitches. Like you know what I'm saying? So I thought this aspect was very telling. Oh my God. And his Chiron squaring his Saturn reinforces this theme of him having issues with either a father or the man in his life, aka his grandfather, because I mean, to my knowledge, that's the only man. I think his grandfather raised him as a child. I don't know if his mom remarried or what the tea was on that. So fact check me here in the comment section. But there's this element of him being wounded, abused, victimized by a father figure, a male, him going through issues like, or even there being a generational curse as far as the male side of his family is concerned. So there could have been demons that his grandfather or his father, grandfather, and his father before him had been experiencing. I wouldn't be surprised if he comes from a long lineage of fucked up men in his family. His Jupiter is squaring his Pluto, and this aspect can deal with somebody who is very heavily involved with criminality, violence, prostitution, in his case, murder, and as a result, they could spend a lot of time in the criminal justice system, especially with Jupiter representing the legal system also. So this aspect can also bring about somebody who is a bigot, somebody who is very like just that's the only way I can really describe it, like a bigot, prejudice, very closed-minded. Your Jupiter can also symbolize your beliefs, and that Pluto is literally all about like domination. So forcing your beliefs off on other people, projecting your ideas, clinging on very tightly to your own world views, which interestingly enough, in a documentary, they were saying that he was very plugged into the Republican Party. So I'm like, not to say all Republicans are bigots, because they're not, but all bigots are Republicans. Okay? So there's that. And then this is reinforced with him having, a lot of Sagittarian energy. Sagittarians are most likely to be racist, quite frankly, of all the signs in the zodiac. And I'm going to reach a stopping point here because I'm tired. I'm tired, and it's a Friday night, and I'm trying to like get through some other videos. So what I'm going to do is make this a 2-part series. So I'm going to, maybe tomorrow or whenever, I'll pick back up on this, because he does have a lot of substantive things and very telling things in his chart that I really want to touch on. So yeah, to be continued, y'all. Drop a comment in the comment section down below. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't. Go do that, baby. What is you waiting on? What is you doing? Share with a friend, tell a friend. And also make sure you practice unconditional self-love. That's the most important thing, because that way you'll be able to love others. And you know what I'm saying? That's what life is all about. And until next time, I holla.